Hi everyone, my name is Robin Lewis. In this video, I'm going to be making this wood pendant lampshade. This is the board I'm going to be using. This is Vic Ash, and this is a very specific piece of timber. You'll notice there are no knots. It is entirely clear. Something else, and I'll bring you around to the end grain for this. You'll notice that the grain direction is very straight. So I'm going to be making cuts in this direction, running along there, and I'm going to have very straight grain so you won't get any grain run out. Now to make all the rip cuts, I'm going to be using my bandsaw. This is a 3 horsepower bandsaw, and I'm just going to use a ruler to set my fence. You can use the guide on the saw, but I just find that this is a more foolproof method. So I'll set that to 5 mil and then lock it in place. This bandsaw is from Carbotech, and I've also got one of their 19mm blades on it. With this setup, I tend to use it as if it was a table saw, but the cut quality isn't as clean. So after each pass, I've got to take it over to a jointer to clean it up. And after all that, I'm left with 53 strips, and I need to get these all sanded down using the drum sander to the same thickness. With all of the pieces now cut down to the appropriate thickness, I can start working on the curve and how I'm going to shape that. I'm going to be using this piece of MDF to make a template, and using this thin piece of MDF, this is going to be what I use to actually draw the curve. With the template complete, I could build up some sheets of MDF to just thicker than the strips of Vic Ash. Then I could trace the pattern onto them, take it over to the bandsaw and cut just heavy of the line, and then come back with a pattern bit on the router and clean it up so it's exactly the same as the template. Alright, I am ready for this glue up. I've got my 2 sets of strips on either side. I've got my form that I'm going to be gluing against, and I've got all my clamps ready to go. I'm going to be doing 2 sets at once just to speed up the glue up process. You may be saying that the outside piece will have a slightly different radius to the inside, and yes, technically you're right, but because this is such a gradual curve in the way they're going to be used on the pendant, I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference. And while I'm working my way through all of these glue ups, I can get started on the top and the bottom of the pendant. What I could do is just reference off this edge and then draw my octagon from there. But what I'm going to do is change this angle to 22.5 degrees. That way there won't be one side that will be entirely in grain. This just means it'll break it up a bit more and you won't have that stark contrasts on some sides. I've gone with 22 degrees because with an octagon you're working at 45-degree angles, so moving at 22 means that I'm going to get a nice split. I did that first cut on the miter saw, and I've actually decided I'm not going to anymore. It just feels wrong. It just feels like that board could just twist and all kinds of hell break loose. So instead I'm going to be using my bandsaw and my oscillating belt sander. This I can just use to sneak up on the line and get it perfect. Here's why I chose an octagon for the shape over something like a pentagon or a hexagon. There is a perpendicular face which I could line up on the bandsaw fence and then push the workpiece through. That way those strips will come into the octagon perfectly perpendicular to each face. Next, I got rid of all of the dry glue squeeze out from the strips and got them all to the same thickness using my drum sander. And after all that sanding, I'm left with this very satisfying reveal. Those are all the strips sanded to the same thickness. It's now starting to get towards the end of the project and the more complicated part, so there's some small things that need to be done. I need a hole to put the globe up into. I did some research and found probably one of the widest globes that I'm going to find, one of those vintage antique looking globes, is 125 millimeters wide. So I have a 127 millimeter hole saw. That's pretty straightforward. I would have liked to have gone a bit bigger to reduce as much weight as possible, but that's the biggest hole saw I have, so that'll work. Then moving on to the top piece, this is where it becomes a bit more complicated. I've got to be able to slide this up and through the existing pendant, but then I also want to be able to clamp the wire so that the pendant is hanging down around here. I don't want the pendant to be stuck up at the top. So, do I want that to be there? So what I'm going to have to do is cut a hole big enough to feed the lamp holder through, and then create some kind of mechanism that I can clamp it down on once it's gone through and you can squeeze onto the wire. I've got an idea for that. The next job is going to be the last big job of the project. We're getting close to the end now, and that is to take these strips and fit them into these slots. You can see they're a little bit over, a little bit heavy, so I'll take these over to the edge sander, oscillating edge sander, and trim them down slightly till they fit. This is going to take a while because I'm doing each strip individually, fitting it, but this way I know I'm going to get a very, very tight fit. You can see I'm using these 4, let's call them posts. They are cut to the same length, and they're ensuring that the top and bottom octagon are perfectly parallel. And after the glue had dried, it was simply a case of fitting each strip one at a time. Now that all the strips are fitting, I can pull one out at a time, sand it up to 400 grit, and then glue it back in place, and then move on to the next one. My original goal and idea was to cut all of these bits protruding flush with the top and then sand the whole thing. Do that on the top and the bottom. But now that I'm looking at it, I actually like them sticking up a little bit further, so I think I'm going to cut them all down so that they're a uniform height and then sand the inside. In the end, I settled on an oil as a finish, although I'd really wanted to use something like a satin polyurethane. But the problem is, with all of these nooks and crannies, to get a consistent film finish would have just been impossible if you weren't spraying. After that had dried, I took it upstairs to get it installed, and after many, many failed attempts, nope, not gonna work. That was going to happen once, wasn't it? This is going to be a while. I eventually figured out a system that worked, and I got it in place. If you are going to make a pendant like this, keep in mind the weight. This comes in just under the recommended amount when hanging off the electrical cable. The next day I got one of those vintage looking globes. This is actually an LED version, which is great. And as soon as I turned it on, I was so pumped with the result. All of those shadows on the ceiling and the wall, that's what I was going for. I'm so happy with the result. Thanks very much for watching. My name is Robin Lewis. Take care everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.